and I'd like to call the room to order. Kia ora and welcome along to our first Finance and Monitoring Committee meeting for 2024. And how delighted am I to see such a full room of councillors. Thank you for prioritising the first of our meetings. Welcome also to our residents online and especially to those who have been able to join us in the chamber today. Thank you for making the effort to come along. Can we please start with our karakia to open our meeting this morning? Members, you've got the words on the run sheet. Governance, are we putting that up on the board at all?
Do that as well.
We'll also put that up on the board. So inoi tātou, tuia te runga, tuia te raro, tuia e roto, tuia e waho, tuia na kaiamahi o te kaunihira o Kirikiriroa. Whaia te iti kahurangi, kia u, kia mau, kia ita, haumie, huie, tai kie. Thank you everyone, that was rousing. Yeah, good way to finish. Now look, to the business of the day. It's, if you haven't already looked at your calendar, it's Leap Day today, the 29th of February. Congratulations to... It does mean that Angela, Deputy Mayor Angela can use her discretion. But... Also, though, congratulations to anyone who's celebrating on this special day. Please make the most of it. That only comes around once every 4 years. Look, I'd also, before we start our meeting, like to recognise the work that's gone into presenting these accounts to us today. The committee, I hope you've noticed that all of these reports are as at the 31st of January 2024. And it's a real benefit to us as a committee to have such up-to-date, current information for us to make our decisions. So I thank you very much, Tracy, and to your team for being able to put this together. I do hope that everyone's been able to enjoy a bit of a break over summer, though, in saying that. So let's also talk about timing this morning. I'd like us to be able to get through to about 11 o'clock where we can perhaps have a morning tea break. And if we're still going, a 1 o'clock lunch. Governance, does that suit the time frames? All right. So let's look at our agenda. In the first instance, an amendment to apologies. You can see in the room that Councillor Naidoo-Rolfe is in fact here and not absent. But we do acknowledge that Mayor Paula Southgate is absent on council business, and that should our meeting go longer than we plan, our new councillor Tim needs to depart early. Aha, yes, getting married on the 29th, so regards. Excellent, excellent. So I'll move that.
Chair, just for the,
yes.
I'm not quite sure how we do the minute notes, but Mayor Southgate wanted to, I know you've said council business, but she's down in Wellington on national council business and the transport advisory group, so she wanted me to just
thank you for the extra
sure
clarification. And I just noticed out of my right eye that we have Councillor Hutt joining us online. Welcome, Councillor Hutt. So I'll move those apologies. Do I have a seconder? All those in favour? Now to the confirmation of the agenda as is on your run sheets. Do I have a mover? Anna Casey Cox, and seconded by Emma, Councillor Emma. All those in favour? Declarations of interest, are there any? None that I can identify. A public forum, I understand that there's no registered speakers today, so we'll move on to our next item. Number 5, confirmation of the Finance and Monitoring Committee open minutes for the 31st of October, page 6 on your diligent notes. Are there any matters arising, councillors? There being none, do I have a mover? Yes. Councillor Tauriki, a seconder?
I'll second.
Deputy Mayor, all those in favour? Excellent. Item number 6, the Chair's report. I'll take that as read, but I did want to use this opportunity to formally welcome the successful Hamilton West by-election candidate, Tim McIndoe. East, I beg your pardon. Did I say West?
Just to that too.
Gee.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was just looking at you, made me think of the West.
Thank you.
However, our candidate and successful councillor now, both welcoming you to the council and to our meeting today. I understand this is your 3rd formal meeting, so congratulations on your success. And I hope that you've got all the tools to be able to do the job well. Sometimes that takes a wee while to settle in.
I don't, and I'm afraid my latest is Diligent has decided to play up for me this morning, so I might just pop over and talk to Amy if I may.
All right, well, we'll cut you some slack on that.
Thank you for that warm welcome.
Okay, all right, thank you. Councillor Wilson, questions?
Thanks, Chair Maxine. Thanks for your Chair's report. I do want to zero in a couple of your statements for you to give some further explanation. You accuse a number of the candidates of politicking and highlighting the severity of our debt and our financial predicament. Do I read from that that those things aren't valid? Are you saying that these concerns are not valid concerns?
Good heavens, no. I take the city's debt very seriously, as I believe that the whole of our residents do as well. I think my comments there were rather with context of the campaigning, and that it wasn't in the full context of the value of debt being phased over a much longer period, allowing for residents, not just of today, but future residents, to be able to share the burden of the cost of providing those assets. I think also it was really useful for us to be able to understand the value of our assets, actually. We may report it in some annual reports and our long-term plan discussions, but a $6 billion asset base is not insignificant and offers a value and a lifestyle for residents that that can offset the negative impacts of having a high debt.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for your question. Any further questions, councillors? No? Then I'll move that it's that my report is accepted, and a seconder.
Yep, I'll second.
Our Deputy Morkel. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried unanimously, I think that is, isn't it? Thank you. Let us move on then to item number 8 and, beg your pardon, 7. Getting ahead of myself here. And your run sheet will say that that's Ian Anderson's report, but he is away on leave today, so we welcome Kelly Stokes to the chair. There have been some questions that were answered earlier in the week in the light of Ian's absence from the meeting today, and so those have been answered via email. I hope that satisfies our councillors' questions, and ask that if that is the case, then we can get to the business of the day as expediently as possible. So Kelly, I'll leave the mic to you.
Maxine,
Indeed.
a procedural question. You're not
indeed.
at all suggesting that you want to stymie debate and discussion on the
Oh, good
report
heavens, no.
and ask questions
No.
if we have questions?
Not at all.
Thank you.
Not at
'cause
all.
I-
What I do ask, though, respectfully, is that if your question has already been answered during the week via email, that as long as that satisfied your inquiry, that we can then
Thank you.
not hold up the business of the day.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly, to you.
Ata Marie, morena tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much to Ian for going on annual leave and giving me this honour. I have better shoes than him, so that's fine. You'll have in front of you here our normal capital portfolio monitoring report. Some areas that I'd like to highlight to you today are probably paragraph 11, that the current changes in the annual budget are now at 359 million, which is a reduction of 27.4. The reasons for which are indicated in the report, but mostly due to the Surf Transport Choices funding being removed from the program. The capital work in progress WIP is 774 million, and within this amount 205 is of assets that are in service but have not yet been capitalised. But we have a plan for attack on this, and we're working every day to reduce this. It's also a function of how large our program is. One project has an orange risk status that's detailed in paragraph 55. And we've had some questions on that, which we've answered via email. In paragraph 27, we have a summary table that indicates the opening budget as at the 1st of July was 351 million, and a correction to the last line that the forecast budget was not at 30th of September, but rather the 31st of January 24, which is the 359 million that I mentioned previously. The actual capital expenditure up to the 31st of January 24 is 190.9 million. So to compare that to the same period last year, which was 152 million. So we have a real focus and we're geared up for delivery of the capital program. And just for context, about 5 years ago, the entire capital budget for the entire year was about 80 million. So we have a growth city and we have a growth program that matches that. You'll note that there were some deferrals that are mentioned in the report, and they're in paragraph 38 and 39 with some explanations about what they are. And I've already mentioned paragraph 41, which is around the changes. And one item that probably doesn't get very much attention, but is actually quite a milestone, is in paragraph 49, which talks about our HIF drawdowns. Way back in August 2018, before some of us were at council, Hamilton City Council entered into this quite substantial agreement, and in quarter ending March 24, the full drawdown will be realised, and this is a really significant milestone for the Peacock Development Program. So that's the areas that I wanted to draw your attention to, and I have a whole team here with me that is happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Kelly, and we'll go to the board and invite Councillor Bidder.
Chair Maxine. Kelly, on the Housing Infrastructure Fund, I just want to get a bit of an understanding, so bear with me, there is a question. The 10 years drawdown, so 10 years it's interest-free, but did we have to start paying it back after 7 years or something? I sort of have that recollection that there's a figure where we start paying it back sooner.
So this is definitely before my time at council, so I'll refer it over to Andrew Parsons.
And Tracy, feel free to jump in if needed. But no, so the HIF contract was entered into by council by resolution in 28 June 2018. And so the HIF arrangement is 110 odd million dollars of subsidy, so you don't pay that back, and then roughly $180 million of interest-free loan. The way the facility agreement is structured is that each quarterly drawdown is an individual, separate 10-year interest-free loan. So if we look at the drawdown that's made for December ending 2023, you have 10 years of interest-free period on that individual quarter loan. So if we end up drawing, and I can't remember the numbers, we end up drawing down 30 individual quarterly payments, and there's 30 individual 10-year loans. Each clock starts on the day of the drawdown. Yes. So you end up with a staged payback. So the first payment will be made in 2028, 29 period. But
Right.
so possibly a little more detail than you wanted, but
No, that actually was the detail I was wanting. So by the time of the first repayments, the first tranche drawdown,
Wonder,
Well-
Councillor Bitter, if you're able to speak into the
yes,
microphone so that your voice carries, and
Sure.
I'm sure Andrew won't mind your back.
that's fine, yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Andrew. That was the sort of detail I was wanting. So if we take, for example, say the very first drawdown that starts for repayment in 2028, will we have received sufficient DCs by that time to repay that loan in full, or would we be needing to repay it from other sources, such as a loan which has its own interest rate applied to it?
that question is way beyond my ability to answer. But what I would say, and I might have to defer to Tracy, but what I would say is those initial drawdowns were incredibly small because they were just project startup related costs. So they're not very large numbers at all. The other comment I would make is there is development activity happening in Peacock, mostly around that State Highway 3 area. So there's quite a few hundred houses, so there are DCs coming in. But the specific of your question is, is there enough DCs receipted? It's not something I could personally answer. I suspect there is, but I'd have to go to Greg Carstens or Tracy for a fuller answer to that question.
So, as I understand that, that it's complex in detail, I would accept a sort of gut feel if you think that there's enough DCs coming in to cover the repayment at the time. That would be a suitable answer. Tracy, is that a reasonable statement? Yeah. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bitter. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks.
Actually, if you don't mind, can I quickly just, while we're talking about Peacock, Andrew, you've got a report coming to council in March, and can we expect to see a bit more detail with regard to the HIF borrowings and perhaps the sorts of questions that Councillor Bitter is asking with regard to payment structures, etc.?
Absolutely. So we've previously taken a full financial update to council in September. We do periodically and at every contract, a significant contract decision. So we're just finalising a report now for the council meeting in March. So yes, the intention is to cover the entire financial health of that program.
Thank you.
No apology required, because my is also regarding peacocks. Through the chair, to Andrew, I'm assuming, how important is peacocks to our future growth strategy?
It's probably a question best directed to Blair, but Peacock forms part of our planned greenfield growth program going forward. It forms part of their Hamilton urban growth strategy, as does Rotokauri and Rototuna and Ruakura. So they're critical city expansion areas.
So could you help me understand the scale? You mentioned other growth areas. What's the housing yield projected to be in Peacocks versus those other areas over, say, the 30 years of development? Just to help me understand scale.
I would have to go to get those figures. I'm sorry, I'm not the expert on the housing, but there's thousands of houses planned in the Peacock development. But I'd have to go and just get the exact number and come back to you.
As a result of cost escalation in the Peacocks development, and the reduction in yield because of multiple aspects, is Peacocks a competitive proposition? Just in terms of, can you advise the Finance Committee as to the likely cost per section as a result of all the funds that have been required to be invested in Peacocks?
I would have to defer that to Blair and his team. I can get someone to come in to answer that question because I know they've actively looked at that, but that's not something I'm involved in. What I would say, though, is that not only are there costs and reduction in yield, there's also increase through increased density, so there's quite a complex scenario playing out. But I know that Mark Davey and co and Greg have done some work on this. I can ask them to come in if you wish.
I guess, Madam Chair, what I'm interested in is we often get the financial elements and the more in-depth data and information is not necessarily at the same meeting. So we're seeing one side of the ledger and I'm not getting the optics on the other.
And I sympathise with the points that you're making, Councillor Wilson. I wonder, though, whether that is going to be handled through the paper that's going to be coming to our March 14th meeting. Can we expect that level of detail also there, Andrew?
The March paper is a financial update across the whole program. The yield and the housing matters are dealt with in the Strategic Growth and District Plan Committee. So I do accept Councillor Wilson's point that, different committees are picking up different aspects, but we can look to cover that off. I see Blair's just coming in now, so he'll be a bit blindsided.
Thank you, Blair.
So, Madam Chair, I would like the answer to my question, and I will happily put them again to Blair. And just from a procedural, I look forward to some guidance from you going forward. This silos way we're managing things potentially exposes us to the left hand not fully understanding the right hand. And I think that's a critical financial risk as well as a broader organisational risk. Blair, if you've been able to take your seat, nice to see you. Blair, how important in terms of scale is the Peacocks development in terms of our known need for housing over the next 30 years? So 1,200 houses each year we need. How important is Peacocks in that delivery?
It's our most significant new greenfield growth cell that's going to provide housing for the next couple of decades.
Thank you. In light of the financial blowouts regarding the Peacocks development, for a number of reasons that have been explained, and the consequential reduction in yield as a result of known resource consent processes and plan changes, how competitive is Peacocks in the current market, and what is the likelihood that the market will uptake at the level we had projected and that those financial benefits that would subsequently flow from that uptake to fund our debt, how likely is that to occur?
I think it depends over what time frame you are asking that question, Councillor. Peacock is being built to deliver a growth cell for at least a couple of decades. It's enabled by an interest-free housing infrastructure loan, which was specifically secured to help council fund the enabling infrastructure at a lower cost to I guess, address cycles of economic activity. At the present time, it's of no surprise that new build feasibility is challenging, and that's been well reported in terms of the cost to build and the cost of capital for development. So in the immediate short term, Peacock yield will be lower than hoped just because of the overall market feasibility, but Peacock is designed and has been developed in a manner such that the barriers to development there are significantly reduced to other growth areas because the enabling infrastructure is in place. And so again, I come back to the answer to your question depends over which time frame and cycle you look at. Councillor.
Thank you. My final question, Madam Chair, and this is the really vital one that has immediate reference to finance. Blair, I've understood the 20-year argument. Going back to Councillor Andrews' earlier question, over the period where we are going to have to start to repay the loans that enabled the infrastructure for Peacocks and our projected revenue, are you saying that the current growth yield mix at Peacocks will cover those interest payments, or are ratepayers likely to have to carry the burden of the gap for a much longer period over the 20 years of the project under the current optics that we're facing?
Council, I don't have all that information in front of me, but councillors will recall, and Andrew will have more detail on this, that the HIF loan is structured such that the payments are low, and in the early term of the HIF loan arrangements. Through the long-term plan process, we obviously constantly revise our development contributions revenue projections. That's what's in front of council for the 2024 LTP. That reflects our latest understanding of projected uptake and development contributions revenue. So specifically in terms of Peacock, I don't have the information in front of me, but again, I come back to the interest cost, which is obviously a significant part of any infrastructure. $180 million of that for Peacock is interest-free for a period of 10 years, and that is designed to help council, I guess, address some of those start-up periods that you refer to lower the burden on the council finances.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I just wanted to raise that in the fact that I'd like to see the full size of the pie, and it's siloed currently. And so I look forward to maybe either staff or either yourself having that in another agenda or another workshop. I just want to be able to keep an eye on that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take those points and ponder a solution. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair Maxine. My question would probably also be to Blair, and that's in a similar vein. We know there is at least one other area in the city where it's infrastructure ready, but we're not seeing houses being built. And there isn't a huge cost for that landowner to just sit on the land, and in fact, they may see a benefit in the rise of land values in the meantime. So I guess my question is, do we risk seeing a similar situation in Peacock, or at least a situation where it's maybe there's the need to look at interventions to encourage yield to come, I guess, to encourage that greater yield?
The answer is yes, and council may recall through the long-term plan process you have asked through a rating working group to be established to look at such a mechanism as part of the annual plan for next year, to look at undeveloped land where we have, as a council, provide infrastructure, and for various reasons that land is not being brought to the market as readily as we would desire it to. So absolutely, Councillor Sarah, that risk could well be there, and that is the purpose of investigating that potential targeted rate.
Thank you, Blair. Chair Maxine, I had one other question unrelated to that, and it was more clarification just around capital revenue. And it notes that, so we've had more assets vested than expected. Tracy, I was just wanting to understand, in terms of capital revenue, when we're looking at Waka Kotahi, we count that for our debt to revenue and things, but assets would be different? Or can you just help me to understand that? Because they're both here as capital revenue, and I just wanted to clarify how that's treated when we're looking at our debt to revenue ratios and things.
Sure, thank you. Waka Kotahi subsidies are part of our capital revenue, and that obviously goes in and is definitely part of that debt to revenue ratio. Vested assets are actual assets. So the developer creates all of those things and they vest them through. So they obviously go on to our fixed asset registers, and from there we start depreciating. So that's one of the reasons why you're seeing an increase, which I'll talk about now, so I have to talk about it in my report. One of the increases for our depreciation expense this year because we got a lot of vested assets last year, a lot more than what we'd budgeted to do. So if you imagine I'm budgeting to depreciate on the vested assets budget, we got a lot more. So when obviously in the timing of the annual plan, we ended up, we've got a difference from what I've budgeted for. So, but that's actual assets that we get given.
All right, thank you. Cool. Thanks, Councillor Nixon.
Thanks, everyone. There being no further questions, I'll ask for...
I'm really sorry to do this. I have a question, but I could probably wait until item 8, if you prefer me to. It's just on whether growth is paying for growth type scenario, and I guess that's partially the capital, but it could also be, the overall financial. So I'm waiting for you to rule.
I'll take advice on where that ought to sit. Tracy?
Why don't we go now? Cool. Great.
Very well.
With your leave, thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe it's to you, David, or to Blair. Could someone explain to me what pays for growth? What pays for the growth in terms of infrastructure?
So I suppose I'd start by identifying what's not growth, and that is what we've already built, what we've already got in use, and certainly our operating costs link in with what we already have in use. When we're talking about expanding into brown or greenfield areas, then we're talking about the cost of doing that, and therefore who should pay. And a key element of the financial strategy is as a guiding principle is growth should pay for growth. It doesn't always happen that way because there are other factors, but that's our starting point that Council has decided to have in the financial strategy. So fundamentally, growth is shared between existing ratepayers and new ratepayers, which is why we need debt. Most of the infrastructure that goes in the ground to enable growth is recovered through the development of those greenfield areas and brownfield areas through development contributions. I think, and Blair could correct me, that when we talk about the cost of that infrastructure, about 85%, 83% is captured from new development, so in other words developers, and the balance is paid for by existing ratepayers. So an example would be a new road. We've got new residents that would benefit from that, but we have a lot of existing residents that would. So that's why it's not 100% paid by developers. So we try our, my summary position would be we try as much as possible to have those who are benefiting from growth to pay for growth.
Okay. There's been a lot of discussion both in the media, Chair's report, all over the organisation about our current financial position is a result of our incredible growth, and we're the fastest growing metro, apparently. In light of that speed and growth, and that growth is supposed to pay for growth, is the explanation for why it's clearly not working currently, because we've got this huge amount of debt, is that purely just a timing issue?
I wouldn't agree that it's not working. I mean, as Kelly pointed out, our capital program 5 years ago was 80 million. Now we're closer to 400 million. So debt is what we need to do to share the intergenerational benefit of the assets that we build in the growth areas. So our challenge, and when we look at for example, our long-term plan rates increase, fundamentally for the first time, it's driven by needing more revenue in the front door to be able to meet our debt covenants to borrow the money to deliver on growth. And it's a philosophical question whether or not we would slow down growth or not, and what the right time is to invest. Because I remember a few years ago under Mayor King, there was a problem of now we've got so much growth, but we haven't prepared ourselves by putting the infrastructure in the ground.
Thank you. So my final question. In light of the narrative that the revenue process is broken and we need to get the government to share more of a rate take, but meanwhile we're still spending all of this money to enable growth, so that's our current behaviour. Have I understood you right? The risk taker in all of this, waiting for the timing to get right and developers to come along and the market to uplift and that DCs to be paid, the pure risk taker in this equation currently is the current ratepayer.
The current ratepayer and council, in the sense of council not being able to deliver other programs because we've just maxed our debt capacity.
Right. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Blair, have you got something you want to add?
I feel as though there's just a couple of additional points, Councillor Wilson, that I could add into this, and I don't want to go into the council sweepstake for words not used, but some councils will remember a term causal nexus, and that really refers to linking the beneficiaries and those who cause the costs, and that's ultimately where the what is growth is determined. So when you construct an asset, and particularly in growth areas, it's obviously driven by a need to enable a growth area, but those who benefit from the construction of the asset may be more than those in the growth community. And so you build a sports park in a growth area, it's actually available to all in the city to use. You build a transport corridor, it's not just restricted to those in that particular growth cell. So the costs are actually apportioned between the new area and potentially the existing residents. So I think growth does pay for growth. The question comes back to what is the pure growth portion versus what is providing benefit to the city or addressing existing levels of services where they may be deficient. The second thing I would just add, Councillor Wilson, to your questions were one of the, around how we fund and pay for growth. Council has challenged us to be innovative in thinking about that. So that's where we look to use private developer agreements with developers to leverage the commercial negotiations, find value capture, to encourage the developers to put in infrastructure that otherwise council would put in. And there are some that you'll be familiar with, some that we're talking to you at the moment about. The HIF loan was also an example of innovation where the government recognised of the day there was a problem, and they said, we will help you fund the massive lead infrastructure for Peacock, and we'll take the burden of interest off the table for 10 years for the loan. So I think we all acknowledge, councillors, that infrastructure funding is a challenge, and the risk burden often sits unfairly with council. That's why we're using innovative approaches to try and spread that burden and to try and de-risk our processes and have the development community also, or the government, come to the table and share that risk equation as well. So hopefully that just adds a bit to that context.
I've hogged the floor. I have some more, but I'll let others play.
Thank you, and Councillor Bidder. Second
Maxine?
time around, is it? Yes.
Yes. I'll direct this one at Tracy. Would our financial position be better if we weren't growing as a city?
That's a really hard question because if you're not growing, you wouldn't be spending, you wouldn't be getting in the revenue, and it's all relative. And again, it's all about timing as well. So there's not an easy answer for that.
Right.
Can I help?
Yes.
We have $6.5 billion worth of assets that need to be looked after, maintained and renewed. And with inflation coming in the way it has, that it wouldn't matter if you grow or not. It would. I think there'd be an element that would cost more to the city. And I also think, in terms of our, if you say our model of intergenerational benefit and the need for debt, then interest rates going up. Doesn't matter if we grow, we still have to pay back the debt. But Tracy's right. It is complex. But those are two key streams that cause us to, even if we didn't grow, we'd still have increased costs to the residents.
Right. Next question, and I'm not sure who wants to answer this one. Who is telling us to grow? Who is telling us to grow?
I can have an answer that one. I mean, I think it's firstly, growth is not something that we can shut off or say no to. It's occurring through a whole range of factors: immigration, births and deaths, internal migration. Secondly, the government have been very clear around their requirements to councils in terms of how they must respond to the needs of managing our city and through various instruments, through the Resource Management National Policy Statements, very clear directives of councils, which effectively require us to provide for growth. And of course, if you look at the new incoming coalition government, they've got a Housing for Growth proposal, which is talking about a minimum of 30 years enabled land, zone enabled land. So it's very clear the government have stepped into the space. I think the question that councillors may want to ponder is, are the directives of government matched by funding partnerships or arrangements with government to help us meet that when often the drivers of growth are through factors such as immigration, which we can't control, and the beneficiaries of growth are often passed back to the government by way of increased GST and income tax that we don't get a share of. And so I think that's the other interesting aspect of the question.
Very good answer. Continuing on, for existing residents, you've mentioned some benefits of growth for them, such as other parks and facilities. Would that imply that they have insufficient facilities at the moment? And also, existing residents have paid for existing facilities that are then used by new residents. Shouldn't new residents be subsidising the payments that's already been done by existing residents?
Got that?
I think there's a lot in there. Sorry, Andrew. I mean, the challenge is that standards are changing, levels of service continue to change, but the notion that someone new to the city effectively gets the benefit of those who have come before us is, I think, they're sort of behind your question. That's a really interesting philosophical discussion. We obviously try to capture the direct costs that are impacted through development contributions and PDAs, but the notion of a payment to connect or a payment to be part of the city is not something that we or any other council have really ever been able to solve. I think the other way you could also look at that same question is those residents who surround the city, who enjoy the benefit of all our services but don't pay anything, also come in that same context. So growth at our periphery adds, some would argue, significant cost and drain and challenges to our services, particularly community amenity, recreational, parks, reserves, transport corridors, and what revenue do we get for that? So I think that's part of that wider philosophical discussion.
Thank you.
Your questions answered?
Yes.
Councillor Bitter? And to Councillor Pike.
Thank you, Chair. Just on a similar vein, and I appreciate, Blair, that this is a tricky balance between growth paying for growth and others, but other existing residents benefiting also. Just trying to understand how we arrive at our calculations on who pays what, who pays for what. what checks and balances are in place to ensure we have the balance right.
I'm assuming you're referring to development contributions or just more generally?
Or just any tools that we have for new buildings and infrastructure and new areas.
Thank you, Councillor. We're guided a lot by the law here and I guess working through particularly provisions in both the Local Government Act and the Rating Act to sort of set some of those principles. And I come back to that terrible term causal nexus. Effectively, it's backed up by a lot of case law that those who most benefit or those who most cause are allocated a share or greater share of the cost than those who aren't, and that's really sits at the heart of this. So I don't want to get into the detail of the law, but effectively it is a very detailed assessment, and it is subject to a lot of rigour, a lot of review to make sure that we are fair and equitable in allocating those costs through the various mechanisms. And of course, as councillors will be aware, that's subject to consultation, submission processes, and potentially judicial review. So through those processes, we have developed robust mechanisms to how we allocate those costs.
So there's third parties essentially that are impacting our ability to decide on how that's balanced. And
look, I think ultimately council retains a lot of input on that process and also discretion. And I give you the example of the development contributions policy, which we've workshopped and is coming for formal draft shortly, where council can make decisions around remissions, where you may choose to reduce or change the level of development contributions. Likewise, through your rating policy, you have the ability to remit certain things. So staff can arrive at a theoretical answer, but then you can choose to moderate that if you so wish.
so then it can come back to a case-by-case basis on
Sure.
on whether growth is paying for growth or ratepayers are
Correct.
taking the burden.
And if I can also add, Councillor Emma, you'll see when we bring back on March the 14th, we have a revenue and financing policy. So that also goes into that next level of detail around user pays, community and all those sorts of things. And again, as Blair's pointed out, there's quite a lot of detail that goes in behind the scenes of how that's determined. So that's also amongst all of those other, that's why all these policies come to you as part of the LTP. So you can see it all as one sort of package on each of these different areas as far as bringing in that revenue.
Thank you.
Councillor Pike, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I'm just looking at which GM. What happens to the economic growth of a city or economic health of a city if it's not growing? No. General Manager.
Do you want me to have another crack at that one? Look, I think that there's no doubt that growth can actually add a lot of vibrancy to a city. It brings diversity of population, brings diversity of business, brings new scale, which enables new attractions, businesses to be located here. So undoubtedly, growth can underpin substantial economic vitality and benefit to a city. Councillor?
So, is it right then that if we're not we hear all over the place, right, the narrative of, dare I say, economics 101, if a city's not growing, it's dying. So for the benefits that you've said a growing city achieves, then the flip side of that would be all of those things would deteriorate if a city is in decline. We see that play out in regional towns around the country.
I think that the flip side may be true if you don't invest or you don't through the small or same ratepayer base. If you don't continue to invest to provide those new amenities or services, then potentially that community could decline. I think the challenge with growth in the context of your question is to make sure that the growth is done well. That you plan for it, you have the right type of development with the right type of amenity, supported by the right type of economic base and jobs and job creation, so that you have all those elements in balance. So, and it comes back to ultimately our 5 outcome areas in our long-term plan, having those in balance so that when our city is growing, we're thinking about all of those to deliver the outcomes you refer to.
And as New Zealand's fastest growing city, are we growing well?
Oh, I think that's a decision that you can probably reflect on, but I'd like to think that certainly we place a lot of focus on our planning for our future communities, current and future communities, and that is reflected in the discussions that we have around this table.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
You'll be forgiven, committee, for wondering which committee you're in, actually. This is, in fact, the Finance Committee, but I've let these questions go in the interest of the point that Councillor Wilson raised earlier about the crossovers in our work and how one committee's work can easily spill into the next, and we don't want to see that siloed. But I will remind you that please keep your questions to the relevance of the paper that we're discussing today. Can I now ask Councillor Donovan for your question, please?
Thanks, Chair Maxine. I'm not sure if my question's relevant, but it's a revenue question. So it's financial.
Definitely relevant. This is finance.
So in light of some of the things I've heard, we often look to our neighbours who are coming into the city and say, you're coming in and using all our things, but not paying anything. Do we actually capture, it's a technical question, is there a way of capturing the revenue that the local people, when I say local, the ones who live outside the boundary, and we always refer to the Tamahiri and whatnot, but you could say Te Aumuru, Ohaupo, whatever. Is there a way that we capture their spend in our city? Because a lot of these people own businesses, they own.
Have we got an answer, GMs, for that one?
It might not be overly relevant, but.
It might be something that we can.
Sort of the front part of your question.
Yes, please.
And Tracy alluded to it before. You know, if you want to go down that track and address that, then we have fees and charges. And this council made a decision around the charging for Hamilton Gardens, that Hamilton residents over 16 would be free, and anyone under 16 would be free. But then later on, once we finish the visitor centre, then any other person's going to have to pay. If they're an adult, is going to have to pay $20 to get in. We already do that at the zoo, but also our residents pay for the zoo. So there's different ways of doing it. Capturing what people outside of Hamilton spend within Hamilton, I presume, Blair, that Andy, Zhao and the team gather some of that information, but they'll be through FPOS transactions and things like that. So we'd have to come back to you and tell you what level of detail we have on that, but top of mind, to be honest, we haven't really discussed that much previously in workshops or anything like that, so we can come back to you with that info. He knew precisely.
All right. Let's draw these questions then to a close and bring us to the point where we need to find a mover. Thank you, Councillor Wilson, and seconded our Deputy Mokau, not Deputy Mayor, but our Deputy Committee. So I will thank you, Kelly, for your presentation, and GMs for your fulsome answers, and invite Councillor Wilson to open.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's been a really good discussion. The first bouquet of the day is to staff and the way we're managing our deferrals. Things are beginning to look better. I'm acknowledging there's a perverse outcome occasionally as a result of that performance, but one always has to take the good with the bad. in regards to this whole argument of growth, paying for growth, it's fascinating, and I can't help but love the causal nexus argument. It's right next to, it's my favourite turn of phrase, Mr. Incremental creep, because they are, in my opinion, they are linked. No one in this chamber, I think, is against growth, and there's been no suggestion that we're against growth. But it needs to be good, well strategized growth, and we must be mindful of the pace. I am concerned that although the simple principle of growth paying for growth and developers who trigger developments, that as a result there is a causal nexus of cost, and that they bear a percentage of that. My point is, the incremental creep area is that a lot of the risk is being borne by the ratepayer, because they are bearing the risk of timing. When the market slows down and there's less DCs and there's less development, who bears the risk? Not the developer, the ratepayer, because we have to fund that infrastructure. And so that's why the pace and the way we execute it is so critical. It's not about the fact we don't want growth. Nobody in their right mind doesn't want growth. It's about how we manage it and who bears the risk.
Thank you. Does the seconder want to comment first, or shall we go to Councillor Bidder? Very well. Councillor Bidder, you.
Thank you, Chair Max. I can truly understand why existing ratepayers would be looking at the rates rises and the debt levels, and be very concerned that they are paying for stuff that they have already paid for, and paying for growth that they are not necessarily getting any benefit from. We have to address that somehow. I think we need some deeper discussions into the detail on how to do that. I am particularly interested in looking at ways of reducing the cost of infrastructure, which is what drives the cost of new growth. And a point that I've made several times, I repeat again, that New Zealand infrastructure is 4 times the OECD average per kilometre of road or metre of pipe or any other services. And there is something wrong about the way we are doing things. If we could reduce the cost to just twice the OECD average, which is still terrible, that would be a huge improvement. So I am very interested in some deeper dives into that with staff.
Thank you. And Councillor Thompson.
Well, thank you, Chair Maxine. I think that the discussion around Peacock highlights a fundamental issue that we face with land and housing. That council can put in the infrastructure or rezone the land, but then developers can take as long as they like to release sections or houses to the market. So if it's more profitable to release them slowly, to control the supply, to take advantage of the increase in land over time, they will do that because it makes sense. And if the market conditions aren't great in the short term and it makes sense to hold on to see prices go up again to make it more profitable to then release sections and houses, they will do that. In the meantime, we take on that risk of having to pay the interest on the infrastructure that we've put in. And we also see dysfunction in the housing market. We're being asked to zone for 30 years of developable land. That does not equate to cheaper land or more houses by itself. We have to solve the problem that in many cases it's more profitable to hold on to the land and release it slowly. So that's where that working group to look at how we disincentivise land banking is really important. But my fear is that as local government, with the rating tools that we have, we may not be able to do it effectively. And that's where we may need to advocate strongly to central government. If we're doing all the work to make sure we've got 30 years of developable land available, then they need to actually come to the party and ensure we've got the tools to get that land and those houses to the market, because that's what's going to help to drive that downwards pressure on land and house prices. Thank you.
Councillor Casey Cox.
Yeah, just quickly building on really what Councillor Thompson's talking about. I guess when I think about what we're investing into in terms of growth, the return on the investment is the housing for our community. And I guess, and all the things that Councillor Thompson said about how we can incentivise housing coming onto the market is really important. But I guess I want to challenge the suggestion that current ratepayers paying for growth are getting nothing out of it, because I'm sure we're all concerned for generations to come in our community, and if we want housing for our children and our grandchildren. So to invest in growth is to also take some responsibility for those future generations. So we all benefit when our communities are well housed. So that's some of the investment that our current ratepayers are making. And yes, I agree, taking on perhaps the risk, more of the risk for that. But it is a risk worth considering in terms of the well-being of our future generations. But yeah, lots to figure through, and definitely lots of work to do in incentivising getting actual houses built. Thank you.
Any other speakers? No, then let me just wrap up to say that this is really the engine room for our council. We can easily see the progress of the plans that have come to fruition, and we can appreciate the scale of the work that's happening right across our city. It's really satisfying to note that the portfolio milestones are largely on track. And I think that's a testament to the rigorous management program that we have in place, and to the systems also that we put around those. It also shows us the value of having that 3-year program of works type of agenda. It gives us flexibility to be able to rephase some of the cash flow in there, to be able to defer or to bring forward even, as we've seen in recent times, projects. The one project that is noted as red in our Peacock's growth cell is a significant investment in our city, and we've heard today that that plays a really critical role in being able to meet the short-term and medium-term market for our housing. Not just housing, also it's going to be a whole community, and that's really important for us to understand. And the work and the effort that's gone into the planning around that is absolutely critical. It's also got one of the newest bridges in Hamilton, and the opening of that is highly anticipated. It's really visible, and it's got a high interest from our community, I'm sure. And also that connecting road that goes along with it, it's had its own very rocky journey. It'll be important for us to remain watchful on the progress, and to be able to communicate clearly the whole story of Peacock and its value, including the value of that interest-free HIF loan. Good luck trying to explain that to the community, how it works, but I think we really do need to recognise its value as well. Kia ora, committee. I will hand back to Councillor Wilson, should you wish to have a right of reply. No, not necessary. Very well, then let's put that to the vote. A show of hands is adequate, I believe. All those in favour? And against?
Carried unanimously.
Thank you. 10:35. We're doing quite well, I believe, with our with our meeting progress and invite Tracy to the chair to present our financial performance and strategy report. Members, that you'll find that on page 49, and invite Tracy to introduce her report. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Chair Max, and thank you again for acknowledging the team and being able to bring you the January 2024 year-to-date results to the committee today. So I'd just firstly like to advise elected members that the results that we're looking at when we're looking at our financial measures on balancing the books and those debt to revenue ratios, especially for the years 2024 and 25 and beyond, they are still based on the 2021-31 LTP and subsequent changes that we've made in annual plans or council decisions. So it's just really important to note that, because obviously we're in the middle of all of our RTP work and we're changing those outer years. So the report today has two main focus areas. The result we have is obviously at the end of January, and the other thing that we're bringing through to you today is what we think the results will be at the end on 30 June 2024. So from our accounting result, we're currently tracking behind budget by the $9.3 million. Keeping in mind this accounting result includes all of our revenue and expenses. And our balancing the books result is also behind budget by the $7.8 million. And no surprise to any of you, based on the discussions that we've been having over the last sort of 6 months, and again today in Chamber this morning, that the bulk of the contributors to those two are our depreciation and our interest costs. The other area to note with regards to the accounting result in particular is the capital revenue space. So you heard Kelly mention this morning in her report around the SURF funding and those projects. Obviously the offset is in the accounting result with not receiving that revenue. The positive side is obviously we're not spending that cash, obviously from a cash flow perspective, through that capital program. So with regards to what our end of year position will be by June 2024, paragraph 19 shows you that we're forecasting our accounting result to continue to be unfavourable and will be $18.5 million, and our balancing the books will remain unfavourable by 19.5. And again, the main drivers are the interest and related revaluations and our depreciation. So just as we did this time last year, ELT and the business are continuing to monitor their spend and are continuing looking at ways we can bring that forecasted spend closer to budget. You'll also note there are quite a few favourable variances across our revenue accounts and unfavourable variances in some of our expenses. An example of this is obviously high operating maintenance costs and the transport activity, but the offset in revenue is the extra subsidies we've received for that work. The other area I wanted to touch on today was our net debt, very topical this morning. So you'll see on page 57, paragraph 54, we had budgeted that this would be $843 million, and we are forecasting that this will just get to over $1 billion by the end of the year. Again, as we talked about, this is a reflection of the capital program that Kelly mentioned earlier this morning. So when we budget for our debt and what that is, so this is pure cash. We obviously allow a certain amount for deferrals based on our history. So keeping in mind this is cash, it's never about the timing and being able to actually do the projects. So over the last financial year, and again what we're seeing in this financial year, those deferrals that we've been talking about haven't actually come to fruition. So that, combined with obviously not being able to balance our books because we're paying additional interest, combines into obviously that higher debt balance. And as we know, debt isn't always a bad thing. We just have to pay it back. Okay, so what I also have today, if I may, Chair, I have Alex and Tom. So they are our PwC Treasury partners, that they are online with me today because obviously interest is a bit of a hot topic, both with our actuals today and obviously as it going into some making final decisions with our long-term plan. So I've invited them if elected members have any questions that they would like to direct around the market, some of the decisions and news that came out this week as well, and what that's doing. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I don't see any on the board, but let me start perhaps with an interest question. In page 55 and paragraph 48, we talk about our hedging and fixed being at 41%, with 40 being our minimum. You also talk a little bit about the Waters decisions yet to be made. I wonder if you could talk us through a little bit more about the benefits of staying in a floating position, but also with keeping in mind that around 30% of our debt is, as I understand it, for Waters, and yet we have 60%, or just close to 60% in a floating capacity.
Thank you, Chair Max. So yes, that's a really good question as far as just some timing. So you have heard me talk about in chamber before around making a conscious decision not to hedge due to the Three Waters and not knowing if that debt was going to go into the new entity. Obviously, pre-Christmas, that's all changed everything that we're doing. So after Christmas, it was one of the first things we had a meeting with our Treasury team on is to make a different decision based on that information. So the team and I have been looking at what that looks like and potentially fixing some more of the interest rates. Again, it is still really risky, and if I may, I'll get Tom to explain why fixing as much as probably what you think we should is still probably not the right thing to do. So Tom, if you can help with that, please.
Yeah, hi, morning everybody. I think to Tracy's point, yeah, we have been, I guess, mindful of that hedged position, but the uncertainty around Three Waters has been a key contributing part. As debt has obviously gone higher, then and our trajectory of debt has gone higher, then obviously that accelerates how quickly we run down that position. But what we're at the moment is a relatively elevated point of the economic cycle, right? So from a Reserve Bank perspective, they've done a lot to raise those floating rate interest rates, as well as that's pushed through into what we can fix for over the next 2, 3, 4 years. And what we're now evaluating effectively is what is the impact to council if we were to go and lock in. I mean, the risk is, to Tracy's point, that we mitigate a lot of that sort of variability and exposure to floating at the moment, but we do so at a time where obviously we're crystallising, I guess, the high point of the cycle, and we're kind of baking that commitment in for the next 4 to 5, 6 years, however long we go. So while I guess we've been working through that, and obviously there's been a lot of moving parts around the LTP debt number and what that trajectory looks like. So I guess as that's been evolving, we have been kind of thinking about sort of what our next steps are, and what we've developed, I guess, or what we're thinking about now is as rates start to come off, and we got that message yesterday, I guess, from the Reserve Bank that I know some of the banks have been calling for a higher OCR. It certainly feels like we are at sort of the top of the cycle in that sense. And so it's probably now about thinking about sort of how we slowly build that hedge position to be slightly higher as rates start to come back down again.
Thank you. That's a terrific answer, and look forward to further discussion around the rates of those fixed and floating positions. I'll go to the board, and I've got Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair Max. The graph on number 53, the debt to revenue ratio, we're projected to exceed the debt to revenue limit in several of those years. What is the consequence of that?
So as I just mentioned earlier, so this is based on the 21-31 LTP. And the reason why we do this and give you that whole 10 years view is to really show some of the decisions and the changes that we make, obviously, during the year as council are making those decisions in the various committees and also in the annual plan. It's to give that visibility of what it will look like. What that helps you do is when I come in the following year to do an annual plan or an LTP, it's no surprise if I say to you, we're already here before you even start making some of your decisions and adding in things that you would like to do. So that's what it's doing. As you know, this is exactly, and this aligns with the discussions we've been having as part of the LTP, why we are doing what we're doing, because if we carried on without making any of those changes, like increased rates, this would be where we would get to. And as soon as we breach, we would then have issues with our lender, LGFA.
So the issues with the lender, would that be them saying, no, we're not giving you more money so that you can't actually exceed the debt cap? Or would it be higher interest rates, credit rating downgrade? What sort of impacts would that have?
Okay, two parts. So the credit rating. So we are already on a negative watch because we're not getting enough revenue in, and obviously we are forecasting this this increase that you're seeing here. So we already know that. So they would obviously have an issue with us if we carried on that trajectory and didn't try and get that back under the limits. So that's them. As far as LGFA are concerned, again, if we weren't addressing this and doing something about it as part of an annual plan or a long-term plan, if we actually got to that level, when we have to submit our information to them, fundamentally we'd probably have to pay back all of our debt because they wouldn't allow us to continue borrowing with them.
Yeah. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is no, don't go over your debt cap, and 10 is no, really, really don't go over your debt cap, for God's sake, where would you place us on that scale?
So my personal advice and my professional advice is I always want you just to be right and a little bit under it. I never want you to get to the very top of it, because again, this is where we start talking about the resilience.
Yes.
And as soon as you get to the top, we've got none. So for the increased costs that we've seen over the last few years, things that have come out of the woodwork that we never knew about, we obviously still need to pay for them. And if there's no money to pay for them, obviously that's a really risky business to be in. So my advice is always to try and just keep it below, and that's what we've been trying to do as part of the long-term plan.
Right.
10.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Right, next one, 54, we're seeing the debt just going up and up and up.
Mm-hmm.
Does this show that we are not repaying debt in the foreseeable future?
Yes, because if you look at paragraph 55, you'll see that we're not forecasting under the current environment. Again, if we weren't changing anything, we were just going to carry on doing what we were doing under the current environment, we don't balance our books until 28, 29. So again, twofold, you've got a capital program that matches this under the 21-31 LTP that is obviously continuing to grow. You're also not balancing the books, so you're not paying back your debt until 28-29. So both of those things together, add them up, that's why your debt is carrying on and increasing over the 10 years.
Yeah. Are lenders concerned that we don't seem to have any intention of repaying our debt in the forecasts?
Remembering that's why we do a 3-year roll of the LTP. So, and an annual plan. So again, at an annual plan time, we have every opportunity to make some fundamental decisions and change any part of what this looks like.
Thanks. And finally, with our growth, getting more and more ratepayers moving into the city with more housing, shouldn't we be able to be paying back more? Why is our debt still going up when we are getting more ratepayers?
It's a really good question. So what we do, especially leading into the budget time, is we obviously review all the information that we have to see how many ratepayers we can get onto our books by the 30th of June. So that's the key. So someone in my team literally drives around the streets of the city leading up in May and June to look at some of those developments, and then we obviously have to deal with our valuers to bring those on and have them sitting in our rating system. Come the 1st of July, whatever's on there is what we rate for. If by chance your house is developed and brought on in August, September, you don't have to pay your rates until the following year. So you effectively get a portion of that year and we can't rate you for that. So for us, it's all about timing and what that sort of looks like. So it's a really crucial time for us to try and work through all of those chunky pieces of work to obviously, for us, is to get as many ratepayers on our books that we can then obviously charge rates for, which equals your revenue.
Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Andrew has asked a number of very good questions, and so I congratulate him in those questions. Tracy, having answered those questions very well, my only question I have of you is, you've spoken a couple of times about if we didn't have this new LTP coming along and we didn't make adjustments, we would have been in trouble, and that's why we have this process. You spoke a lot about the importance of having headroom. In light of our draft LTP that we've sort of going out to consult, can you remind me what year we get to the closest of breaching our debt to revenue and our debt? What are the figures? What's the headroom? And in your professional opinion, the third limb is, in light of your earlier comment, you like to be slightly below because things can come out of nowhere. Are you comfortable?
Yes. So off the top of my head, I think we get to 274. Have you got it there? Thanks. Yeah, that's the one I want. Thank you. Okay, so the closest we get is in years 5 and 6, which is at 274. So our debt to revenue ratio that we will have at that time will be 280. So that's what our GFA have said. So that we go from
6%.
290 down to 285, and then we go to 280. So it's 6%.
And what quantum is that? What dollar value?
So that is having a net debt of $2 billion.
Okay.
This is everything. This is everything.
Yep,
this
that's
is
what we've got to deal with. Yep. Okay.
Yep. So $2 million in year 5.
Okay. And I guess my last question was in regards to having enough headroom at that most critical time, just in case if something came out of the blue. Is it your professional opinion that we've got enough headroom in that critical year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And what sort of shock could we absorb?
Well, it would be like any shock. It's not necessarily just about obviously instantly having the money to pay for it. It would be, we would do exactly what we did in the middle of COVID, and we stopped and readdressed every single spend that we had. We reviewed the whole capital program, we reviewed all of our operating costs, and we made conscious decisions to either stop or delay each of those pieces of work, knowing what was going on. So we would do exactly the same if something obviously awful happened.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Maxine. Tracy, I seem to recall from the LTP meeting that in that first year it was, we went up to 281 or something?
281, yes.
Yeah, so, and there was $12 million of headroom there, right? So that, I guess my question there is, do we have a plan B? Could we have a plan B prepared for if we see less revenue than expected from Waka Kotahi, which would affect that headroom? And I guess there are other factors at play too, where say $1 million less in revenue from development contributions would then presumably reduce our debt headroom by 2.8 million. So it has a disproportionate effect when we're looking at reductions in expected revenue. Are we able to have that kind of contingency plan available for when we come back from consultation, or for later after we've adopted the plan if things aren't going as planned?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, the model's set up to do all of that. So any particular thing that you want us to model and want us to have a look at, we can load that in. So remember, it has to be quite specific because the model is circular as far as what goes into the DC model, as for capital projects. So it kind of all starts with the capital projects. That feeds into the DC model. The DC model then feeds into our DC revenue, which feeds into the debt. That feeds into the interest and the depreciation. And it goes around in a very vicious circle and pops out some numbers at the end. So that's why it's really key. And as you know, having all of these things in advance so we can just put them in and model them, absolutely we can do that for you. It's not a problem.
Okay, thank you. That would be really helpful. In terms of the borrowing headroom, we're having conversations with the local government funding authority, LGFA? Agency. One of those. So, and if we did, say for Waters, see a significant increase, and our credit rating was downgraded because of the extra borrowing. What kind of impact would that in reality have on the cost of borrowing? Say if it was one, what impact would you expect?
It's $5,000 on $1 million. Yeah. So basically what they would do is we'd just get charged a slightly higher interest rate if we were downgraded.
Was it 500,
It's about 5 basis points.
I thought it was 0.05.
Yeah, 5 basis points,
Yeah. Okay. I have some further questions. My other questions around depreciation. So we do, over the last few budgets, we've seen depreciation be higher than expected almost very frequently.
Yes.
Can you explain, Tracy, why that is? Is that just because inflation is pushing up the cost of then renewing the assets that we hold?
So two parts, particularly related to this year. So as I mentioned earlier, the vested assets had a big difference for us as far as what I had budgeted and what we were expecting vested assets to be, hence the depreciation expense with it, and then what actually ended up happening towards it. Remembering that, the timing of the annual plan and when I have to lock and load these budgets makes a bit of a difference. The other biggest one last year was particularly around the transport. Again, the timing of the transport revaluation. So we do revaluations every 3 years. Yep. The timing of that revaluation coming through and what it ended up being was a lot higher than what we had budgeted. So when we'd put our budget together, we'd assumed a particular amount of a percentage of increase, and it was a lot higher from that. But related to your point, and again, the situation that we're in, it was higher because they're evaluating because of inflation and all of those other costs. So again, it was because of that particular reason and pure timing. So by the time I got that information, we'd already locked in the annual plan and it was too late to make any changes.
And apologies, this is probably something I should have emailed because you may not know it off the top of your head, but just what percentage of our total asset base do we depreciate, if that makes sense? So how much is depreciation compared to the total asset base each year? So
I'd have to send you, I can send you that. So so $6 million obviously asset base. Some of that's land though, when we don't depreciate land. But I can definitely send you that.
The stuff that's subject to depreciation.
Yeah, I can do that. Not a problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Cheers.
That's the end of your questions, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Nadirov.
Just first question following on from Sarah's first question around Waka Kotahi and the capital revenue that we've forecasted. First, when do we have any idea around the timing So when will we know what their budgets look like? And how do we budget for the unknown?
Yes, so we talked quite a bit about this at the last long-term plan meeting when we had Robin in the chamber. So we obviously, the team put together what they think we are going to get subsidies on. And then I think it'll be November, Andrew? So in November, we obviously get the Waka Kotahi do their budgets and finalise it, and then we get the output through to see if it matches what ours was. And again, as I mentioned at that meeting, we have had times where it was different and they weren't going to give us as much revenue as we thought they would. So all of those projects came back to chamber and council made a decision to either stop the project because we weren't going to get the revenue or carry on knowing that it was then fully funded by HCC.
And so just for my understanding, Tracy, because it's quite confusing sometimes, with so if a project, if we've budgeted for a project that they then decide to not fund, it obviously impacts our capital revenue in our budget.
Yes.
So how does that have any impact on our headroom or our borrowings in terms of, you know, the loss of revenue?
Yes, and that was what Councillor Sarah was alluding to before, because it's a percentage base, and that's when you're pulling out that revenue out of our debt to revenue ratio, that's when it kicks in. So it's a 2.8%. That's the ratio on how it works. So it's not a dollar for dollar match. Gotcha. So while we talk about pulling out the surf revenue and pulling out the surf costs, fundamentally it feels like it's equal, but as part of that actual calculation, it's not. So.
Okay, that's really worrying, but yes, got it. The other, just a question I had in your report, I just couldn't understand a part around the operational revenue year-end forecast and about other revenue 14.2 million. There's a sentence saying higher market interest rates year-to-date have driven a 13.2 million value gain on the HIF loan, and the forecasted change is excluded from balancing the books. What does that mean?
Oh, so yeah, this is the complicated HIF. So we obviously have the HIF loan, but we have to do an accounting entry around interest rates and what that does, and we have to bring it back on as a fair value onto our books. Doesn't come in, it's not part of balancing our books, and it's not part of our cash. It's just an accounting entry, and that gets picked up as part of the full accounting result. So it just depends on what the market rates are and what we've budgeted to do in that space as far as valuing. So essentially we have to value as if we have paid the interest. So, yep.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any further questions? There being none. Members, just so that you know, I think we'll round up this paper and then take a break. So the meeting is in your hands, and I understand Councillor Wilson would like to move. Yes, do I have a seconder? Councillor Tim. The floor is yours, Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. We're in trouble. And I think the front page of the Waikato Times this morning illustrates the level of trouble we're in. I accept that it is, if we didn't correct our direction and doesn't reflect our draft LTP. But I'm still deeply concerned, even if we implement our draft LTP, that we are going to sail so close to the sun that we're going to burn. And I'm projecting that we will eventually breach our debt to revenue ratio. And I am projecting that we will suffer the significant consequence of a downgrade and the subsequent financial ramifications. And I project that because if you look at every LTP we have done in the last 20 years and every annual plan, we've only ever been able to achieve a balancing of the books 2 times. And every year we end up making projections and forecasts, and we don't make it. And I am terrified we're going to have maybe only a 10, 12, $15 million headroom at one stage. And we have so often, even in the most recent time, encountered headwinds that are significantly more than that. So the sobering message is this: we think we have a draft plan that is going to help us. We need to go further. We haven't gone far enough. If we don't get it right, we are really in trouble.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Bidder.
I want to particularly thank Tracy for the work she does, because she gives us the numbers straight, warts and all, and that's what I want to know. So good work, keep it up. You do scare us and shock us from time to time, but we need to be scared and shocked. We need to make realistic decisions, and we need to have good numbers, and I've got good trust in your numbers. Thank you. We have to live within a legal system and a financial system that places limits on us. We can't break those. It's not our choice. We can't. So we do have to live within our means, and that means we've got some tough decisions to make. We know we've got a tough rates rise. The realistic figure on that rates rise is 54% over 3 years. We've talked about 20%, 25%, but no, it's 54% over 3 years. My insurances have gone up 20% this year. I've got lots of extra costs. We're all suffering. We can't put up rates more. I think we've had that feedback from the public. That leaves very few options, and some of us have proposed cutting staff and cutting consultants, knowing that that does mean a cut in services. And if we keep spending like we're spending, we are going to have to increase those cuts. Thanks.
Any further speakers? Councillor Casey Cox.
I guess I learned this week that New Zealand has some of the most indebted councils in the world, and it's primarily, as I understand, because we have all the responsibility for infrastructure, but we don't have the revenue to fund it. And as Deputy Mayor has said many times, the funding model is broken. So we're not in this situation because we're addicted to spending. I don't believe that, but we are in this situation because we don't have a pathway to fund the infrastructure that we need. And that's why it's so important that the city deals happen, that central government does come to the party. It's not something unique to us. We're seeing it around the country, so it's not a Hamilton issue. And it's not this council's fault, but it is something that we need to address. I agree that the rates increase will hurt our community, some a lot more than others. But I also think there has been a reluctance to increase rates in the past because you don't get voted back in when you increase rates. So we're in this tricky bind, I guess. But again, I don't consider it to be because we're addicted to spending. We're addicted to not increasing revenue and not finding appropriate pathways to address an infrastructure problem. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Maxine. My good friend, Councillor Wilson, across the floor here, I think is being intentionally catastrophic in his rhetoric. And is a little bit like Chicken Little calling that the sky is going to fall in. We have heard from Tracy that we can adjust the amount of projects they're doing. We can adjust things if our financial situation changes. Now, I want to say firstly, after those comments, I am concerned also about the very little debt headroom that we have. Only 12 million in that first year. So that means, what, around $4 million less in revenue, and you've wiped that out. For me, that's a real worry. However, and that is why I'd like to see us start working on a contingency for that now, and actually that we work to increase that headroom before we sign off the LTP. But the reason why I'm made those comments around Councillor Wilson's debate is that we have the time to do this. We're going out to consultation with residents, and when that comes back, we can have another look at how we ensure we have more resilience in our budget. So I'd like us to front foot that. A quick comment, Councillor Andrew has mentioned a couple of times now in the chamber recently around the costs of insurance or energy or other things. And the reality is that all of the costs for every business is going up, and it is really unrealistic for people to assume that councils should be immune to those rising costs, while everyone else is reflecting rising costs in the price that they're putting on their goods. We can't just keep cutting as a way to mitigate that, because at some point there isn't anything left that we should really be cutting. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, I think Councillor Wilson and Councillor Bitter are bang on. What we've seen today, what we've heard today, just reflects the urgency that we should be feeling, all of us. And it's not the $1 billion debt figure and what will happen after that. It's the debt revenue ceiling and the consequences, the dire consequences of breaching that. There's no going back, when that happens. And I keep hearing this refrain about the funding model being broken. The trouble with that is, if you're not being seen to being prudent with your money, you lose credibility if you keep that refrain going. And the trouble is, the people who drove to this chamber today drove past evidence which suggests otherwise in terms of our funding situation. They drove past pointless roundabouts, pointless raised platforms, pointless in-lane bus stops. Yeah, it's small fry, but the optics aren't. And then it's death by 1,000 cuts. There are a whole lot of other things in our budgets as well. You add them all together and you can't say that we are living within our means. And I suggest to you that this just backs up the urgency that a group of councillors felt when they called for a 7% cut in payroll. No one wants to do that. But we've got to do it, and I struggle to see how anyone could actually oppose that when you're faced with these figures that we're seeing today. So I, again, signal to you all, our challenge in the next few months with the LTP is to get out the whatever it is, what's the thing that slasher. It's got to be nothing but core stuff that we stick to. Because I don't think we've got a choice anymore. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair.
Start the clock again for Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. The rhetoric of those of us not wanting to cut core city services, and core city services are libraries and swimming pools and playgrounds.
your point of order?
No one's mentioned cutting libraries. That, yeah, all core services. There's been no mention of that.
Did I mention a member said that?
Hang on,
the chair to
just
rule?
allow me to rule on that. I think Councillor Taylor's correct. Nobody has mentioned that, but it is out in the hemisphere and in media of different kinds. And so in this instance, I'll allow it.
So for me thank you, Chair. So for me as an elected member, core services are libraries, swimming pools and playgrounds. Those are core services for me as well, as they are for many in the community. So I support Councillor Thompson's debate wholeheartedly. That doesn't mean to say that those of us that support those core services are not willing to look for savings. Councillor Taylor mentioned the trouble, I think he said the trouble is, around the rhetoric that the funding model for local government is broken. But it's not rhetoric, it is fact. It was in the Shand report over a decade ago, and we still have made no moves. No council has been able to make no moves with central government over this time. I recently shared an article and some data from the New Zealand Productivity Commission that showed very clearly the incredible flat line of councils in New Zealand and their rates revenue from 1895, and still in 2015 they are still at the same level, as opposed to central government, which, as you can imagine, has increased by around 40%. So it's not a level playing field, whether it's ratepayers or taxpayers for us. So the funding model is broken. We're not the only leader and council in the country, of course, saying that. But my message is, those of us who are not willing to cut community services / core services are also interested in making savings, and will work through the process through the LTP as we're able to do, and as we quite rightly should.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Tim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I associate myself very strongly with the concerns articulated by Councillors Wilson, Bidder and Taylor. I think that they have expressed our very, very serious position clearly and well. I don't need, therefore, to reiterate those remarks. We have, of course, heard this expression that the funding model is broken for a very long period of time. Whether or not that is the case, we simply cannot rely in the short term on any change to that. And that is why I think that the arguments that are being put forward on this side of the table, that we have incredibly tough choices to make and must make those now, is absolutely inescapable and unavoidable. We are so close to being in deep, deep trouble that failure to do so by looking for much greater efficiencies, reining in costs across the board, would be the height of irresponsibility. As Councillor Taylor mentioned a moment ago, none of us gets any pleasure out of this. None of us wants to be cutting staff personnel. None of us wants to be putting jobs at risk and all of the rest of it. But we literally have no room for manoeuvre. We have got to be utterly fiscally responsible in the way that we approach the challenge that we have at the moment. Of course we want to lobby central government to change that funding model. That was one of the positions that I articulated during the by-election campaign. But in the short term, that option is not going to come to our rescue. And we haven't got the long term to start making serious moves in the right direction. So I do urge all councillors to recognise that together we must have as united a voice as possible and as determined an approach to reining in our costs now, because if we don't do it now, we won't be here for much longer to do anything at all.
Thank you. And with nobody else on the board, let me just offer my view, and then we'll go to Councillor Wilson for a right of reply. You may have seen the front page of the Waikato Times, $1 billion is a pretty huge number. And I use the word scary because it sounds scary. And it's something that the public it will identify with. And you know, I can empathise with that. But it's also really important that we also think about the context around which our debt may be held. And I've begun to look to explore that in my Chair's report. We need to think about building our infrastructure for intergenerational use. And we also need to think about how we fund that and spread the cost over that same period. We also need to think about our $6 billion worth of assets base and growing in value every year, and the impact that that has on our balancing of the books. And we can see quite clearly through the depreciation and the rising valuation of those assets that it has quite a huge impact on us, as does the interest, the cost of interest to service our debt. Balancing the books has created quite a lot of debate in the chamber today, and I understand why. But for a good many of us, in a few years past, we have absorbed some of the shock for our residents, because our books allowed us to be able to do that, and that was the right thing to do at the time, and the majority of councillors agreed that that was. So I defend that position. I also defend the right for us to have those discussions through our long-term plan. And so I say, don't panic. Don't be drawn into the hysteria that is being created around our finances. We've got a plan to deal with it, and that is through the long-term plan, and that's the best way for our discussions to continue. Kia ora. Councillor Wilson.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity. I first want to express my sincere thanks to my good colleague, Councillor Serra. Councillor Serra, I think calling me Chicken Little is the nicest thing you've called me in all the years that I've known. And I'd like to take the opportunity to read something about Chicken Little. When a piece of sky falls on the head of Chicken Little, no one believes him. However, his friends trust him, and together they save the world from ending. So I'm hoping that maybe some of my advice will lead to the same outcome. I'm fascinated by how we are quickly to continue to blame the current funding model, the revenue model, on the government, and this is not our fault, and that this is the same all across the country. But I think Councillor McIndoe put it incredibly well, is we know that's a problem, but meanwhile we've got the responsibility to make decisions to fix the problem with what we've got to play with. And I think that's where actually Councillor Serra and in the past Councillor Muku have agreed, that the fact that fiscal responsibility is vital. And so I fully endorse a lot of your concerns, because you're saying that there is a problem. And I'm saying that we're responsible for making decisions now with the tools we have in our toolbox, and that's what we'll be measured with. And I'm fascinated that staff keep telling us, respectfully, they're highlighting the threat, but they're saying we're agile enough when things come our way and we need to hunker down, we can. My point is, we should have been doing that for the last 2 decades. My point is, we should have taken a conservative approach to financial management. My point is that it is frequently too late to change the direction when you're in the cloud and the mountain is in front of you. You do it before you enter the cloud. We have an opportunity. It's the LTP. I look forward to all of your support. Chicken Little would appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. We'll go to the vote. All those in favour, raise your hand. And those against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, colleagues. We'll take a 15-minute break and return at 11:40. Thank you. So let's resume our meeting. Thank you. And thank you. And we're up to item 9, and James has already taken the seat. James will be presenting the non-financial service performance measures, and that's a 6-monthly assessment that comes to this committee. I will hand over to you, James.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning. Are we still morning? Yeah, good morning, councillors. I'll just make a few overarching comments before I get into the results themselves, which you'll already have seen in the report. So you usually see me when we're discussing the next long-term plan, and indeed at the council meeting in a couple of weeks' time, one of the things that we'll be bringing you is our proposed service performance framework for the next long-term plan. And I think in that context, it's probably quite helpful today for us to be discussing the sort of other end of the process, how we're performing against what we said that we'd do in the last long-term plan. That's effectively what the service performance measures are. So we bring this report to you at this stage every year. So looking at our performance over the first half of the year, July to December, and then our end of year performance is tracked through the annual report process, which you'll see in sort of September, October time. And just in that context, it's worth mentioning that we recently received special commendation from the Office of the Auditor General for the way that we report on our measures, and in particular the what's behind the results section of our results reporting, where we sort of try to delve into sort of issues behind that are driving the results. So that's something that we're really pleased with. So turning to the results, or the mid-year results that are in front of us now, as you'll have seen, 44 of our measures are on track. There are 3 which are red, so we're projecting to not achieve them over the course of the year, and 2 that are yellow. The ones that are red are around the amount of industrial land that we have, the number of missed rubbish and recycling collections, and the number of complaints around water quality. And there are 2 yellow measures which are sort of at risk or may require action. One around the number of visitations to our aquatic facilities, and the number of fatal and serious injury crashes on our road network. When we're just linking it back to the long-term plan, when we're seeing results coming through that give us sort of make us sort of reflect on whether the target is the right target, we're reflecting on that as part of the long-term plan process. So there's a couple where we think the targets as currently set probably set us up to fail, and we're making sure that we've got the right targets going forward, so that it's the right balance between being stretching but being realistic. You've got the sort of full detailed annex which goes through all of the performance measures, so I won't go through all of them individually, but I'll take any questions that you have, and for either on the process or on the individual measures. And I believe the Chair has suggested that we go through them by priority, so the measures are all broken down across the 5 priorities are set out in the long-term plan. So perhaps shall I pause at that point and see if there are any questions on either the overall process or any of the results under the first priority, which is a city that's easy to live in.
And I see none. So let's ask also now whether there is some questions or other on a city where people thrive. Any questions, councillors? No. A central city where people love to be. Crickets. I think it's cicadas. A fun city with lots to do. Or a green city. Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair Max. I was trying to see where transport fitted into which one of these, and it comes in under a city that's easy to live in, so if we could actually go back to that.
Let's go back to
it. So after all the money spent on Road to Zero and all the speed bumps and things and lane bus stops and stuff for safety reasons. I see that there has been an increase in injuries on our roads from 15 to 25. What percentage increase is that?
Sorry, 15 to 25, I believe that's a 66% increase.
Yeah, so, yep, thank you.
I was just trying to find what page you were on in terms of that, but 97, thank you.
If I may, Madam Chair, I think that the one point that we would just make on that is obviously the nature of annual plans, annual reports is we're reporting on individual years, so it's quite likely that there would be some variance from one year to the other. Which I believe for that measure we're looking for the long-term plan to look at a slightly longer-term trend rather than just the year-on-year performance. Well, it could make them look better or look worse, depending on what the trends are in any particular year. But just to try to make a more accurate reflection than simply, so if there was one year with a particularly good or particularly bad result, making sure that doesn't skew the results for the following year.
Thank you.
And were there any further questions, councillors, on James's report? Councillor Thompson.
Maxine, with the decision, the recommendation for the long-term plan to not include the performance measure for the missed collections, how do we still maintain a view of that? Because ultimately we're contracting it out and there are obviously issues that are out of our control, but it would still be good to keep a view of that service level.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I could say, and then I'll hand over to Tanya. I believe there's a separate measure which looks at the number of missed collections that are then sort of followed up on sort of within a certain time period. So there is a sort of backstop in that respect. And then I think, irrespective of whether we've got an official measure around it, we'll have mechanisms through the contract for us to sort of test performance. But I'll hand over to Tanya.
Yeah, I have nothing further to add. That's correct. So we are going to change that measure so we can calculate the time it takes us to address a missed valid collection. But through our contract with our contractor, we have those KPIs as part of that contract, so we regularly monitor those on a monthly basis.
Thank you. Chair Maxine, the other question I had was in regard to the amount of land available for housing and business-zoned land. And I guess this might have to wait for the LTP, but is 3 years as a target sufficient? Like,
I will defer on this to Blair.
So in the long-term plan, we're not proposing to change that target from memory, Councillor Sarah. That is, we believe that's still fair, noting that we obviously have separate housing and business assessment targets and bits and pieces which are in relation to short, medium and long-term growth. This is an assessment of right now.
Okay, thanks Blair.
Thank you. Councillor Naidu-Ralph.
Just on page 96, what is this called? Travel times during peak hours. I was just curious as to how we got 9%. Like how often are we measuring? Where are we measuring? Is that the whole city or is it broken into areas?
Excellent question. Are you able to answer that one, Tanya?
By my So and Robin might be able to add to this, councillors. So our peak time, our travel is looked at through our peak times. So that's early in the morning, 7:45 through to 8:45 in the mid-afternoon, which is the school zone, 2:45 to 3:45, and then again in the evening from 4:30 to 5:30. So each area we measure has different profiles depending on where we're working. And what we do is we have traffic counters, so the bumps in the roads, and we are able to use camera data as well to look at those.
Sorry, and when was this measurement taken? Is that set times during the year? Like, is it?
I'll just get Robin to answer that one, Councillor Kesh.
So I guess, just to be clear, this is about predictable travel time. So it's not a measure of congestion. It's a measure of how predictable it is. So if it normally takes you, in the example, normally takes you 20 minutes to get to work, if it's within that sort of within 20 minutes generally, then that shows as being a positive thing. So it's about where you have those huge changes in those flows. This is data that we're collecting constantly and monitoring all over the city as part of our Ad Insight data. So that utilises the Bluetooth type data that we're getting.
So it's not
a measure of congestion.
It's not a measure of it's 9% slower during peak. It's a predictability measure.
It's a predictability measure. So it's so that people can basically plan their trip to work. If I normally leave at 8 o'clock in the morning and it normally takes me 20 minutes, they can plan that.
Okay.
It's when it becomes unpredictable and they don't know whether they should allow 20 minutes or 45 minutes that it becomes a problem. So so that's what this measure is. It's not congestion per se.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Councillor McIndoe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll warn you right at the outset, I think I might be about to be shot down in flames by you on procedural matters. But as the new boy on the block, I hope you'll indulge me. I am really concerned. We are here measuring non-financial service performance measures. There are 5 relatively laudable objectives here. But I would suggest to you that if we are serious about a city that's easy to live in and a city where our people thrive, it is absolutely crucial that we are constantly focused on how they are able to work and earn a living to pay their mortgages, their rent, to feed their children, and so on and so forth. And I am at a loss to understand, therefore, why the 5 priorities haven't been extended to 6 to include a city in which businesses can thrive, because without that, always at the heart of our thinking, I'm not sure that we could ever achieve the first 2 objectives anyway. So it's more of a statement than a question. Maybe outside this meeting somebody can explain to me how that came about.
James, I'll pass that over to you if you feel adequately able to answer.
I didn't want to put it as a question to staff because I didn't really feel it was fair to do so. It's a comment.
And perhaps if you could...
So we set the 5 priorities at the start of the last triennium, so roughly 2020, leading into the 21-31 long-term plan, and that was via quite a wide consultative process with the community. I mean, I think to answer your question directly, I think it's intended that sort of business vibrancy and so on would be included within them. I think in particular in the where our people thrive within that priority. Council did last August reaffirm these 5 priorities for the next long-term plan that we're currently working on. But we can definitely. I mean, we can bring to the next long-term plan meeting, I guess, just our take on how we can ensure that those measures, those kinds of things are encapsulated within the priorities.
Thank you. I understand your point that perhaps for some it is implicit. I think it needs to be explicit.
Thank you. We'll note that.
And with that, you'll be pleased to know that if Madam Chair, if you would excuse me, I have to go off to
Very well.
marry a couple.
And thank you for your contribution this morning.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. James, can you just tell me, please, when and what the process is to review all of these KPIs through the LTP process?
Yes, so at the council meeting in a couple of weeks' time, when we bring you the draft, the consultation document and all of the underlying and supporting information, one of the things that we'll bring you is our updated or proposed service performance framework, which will include, well, these with various sort of suggested changes from staff, and you'll have the ability at that point to make any further changes as you wish.
Okay. So that's coming straight to a meeting, it's not going to a briefing first? I suppose there's no
That's
time,
correct.
right?
Yep.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I think you raise a very good point there, Deputy Mayor. I wonder if there is some benefit in being able to do that. And I wonder if we can leave that with governance and with the LTP team as to whether they might be able to find some time for a quick discussion about that, and to be able to allay the fears of perhaps Councillor Thompson and Deputy Mayor, and allow us the opportunity for some direct feedback.
Very happy to do so.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Donovan.
Max, I'm not entirely sure this is a question for you, James. It may be more directed at the transport team, but the use of the word safe, where we prioritise building connected and safe walkways, is safe all-encompassing of safe as in, like, do we have lighting across footpaths? And it is, okay, all right. I was just looking.
Sorry, I was nodding to acknowledge the question, not to answer it.
Oh, okay, all right. I think it's, if you let me, are we safe in the sense of safe from, I don't know what the word is, predators? Or, or is it safe because from, from...
I think
people
Robin
with utes and surfboards
Robin is
on
coming
board?
to the microphone.
Yeah. Sorry if it's off point.
So for us, safe is that well lit, able to get around safely. It doesn't matter whether you're walking, cycling, or in a vehicle. I believe that there's another measure somewhere else around that feeling of safety and that personal security type one. So,
Personal security,
So
that's the
yes,
word I was
so
looking
that
for.
I think is a separate measure from memory.
Okay.
But yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the clarification, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions, councillors? No? There being none, we thank you, James, for your report. And I'll call for a mover. Councillor Councillor Tawariki and Councillor Thompson, were you happy to second? Very well. Is there any debate? As the mover, you'll reserve the right for right of reply? Very good. Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair Max. We've heard that despite all the spending on road improvements and Road to Zero and all these speed bumps and things, there's been a 66% increase in the number of serious injuries. And in fact, a doubling in the number of injuries for vulnerable users. Not a particularly good result, not a particularly efficient use of money. I spoke in a previous debate about the low-cost, low-risk roading projects, missing another criteria, which is low-cost, low-risk, high-return. And having picked all the low-hanging fruit, we've now been left with low-cost, low-risk, low-return. And it seems in the last year, low-cost, low-risk, negative return, which makes it very hard to justify spending on those projects.
Thank you. Any further debate? Deputy.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair. The reason I raised the KPIs is that certainly over many years we've often seen a yellow dot or amber dot or a red dot, and former Councillor McPherson often raised this as a point of concern where something would trigger, one thing would trigger a red dot, and we were sort of flogging ourselves in terms of KPIs. I appreciate it's really hard actually to measure all of the services and activities that a city provides through key performance indicators. I think there's a lot more to it, but I think that we can do better. I'm not sure I have actually the answers for that. When I look under the drinking water one, there's a red dot there, and there were, around water clarity, etc. And I know for a fact that one of the things that contributed to the red dot was simply a tap at one of our facilities that wasn't operating the way that it should be. So yeah, I think it's a little a crude way to measure KPIs and to hold the organisation to account. And so I do look forward to being able to have a bit more of an in-depth and perhaps an innovative, better way to measure some of these outcomes that we as governors then measure and manage the organisation against. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further debate? No right of reply needed. Very good, thank you. Let's go to the vote. So all those in favour of receiving the report and against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Very good. It takes us to resolution to exclude the public. I hope you got that.
I got that.
Amy, excellent. Thank you. And so all in favour? Aye. Against?
Carried unanimously.
Thank you. We'll give